we went to Snape Maltings, not for a concert, but just as a sort of day out. And there were some Tibetan monks there doing this amazing thing called a mandala, multicolored sand in the most intricate, exquisite sort of mosaics. It's fantastic work. And one of the things they were doing is selling these little bells, little temple, like a little antique symbol. And because I was thinking about the piece all the time, and I've always loved bells. So I thought, well, that might give me an idea for, because I think when I was writing the piece, I was picturing the scene in Magdalen Chapel with the service, incense, and trying to create the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Which
and
is how I tend
to appear at the key moments, don't they, throughout the
yeah. So when I'm contemplating a piece, I like to have as much information as possible about the performers and the place and so on and so forth. I think it was Ravel who said that the more prescriptive, the better, because then your ideas are can come into focus rather than saying, oh, well, you can write anything you like. So anyway, summer 2008, and that was, so I was still writing it, of course, well into September.
Yeah, I remember.
Writing bits in the evening, going into the grammar hall to photocopy them first at 6 o'clock in the morning, the copies for the boys, rehearsing with the boys at 8:10 or 10 to 8, whenever it was, and then doing the rest. But of course, the men then didn't come back till the beginning of October, so we only had 4 weeks with them, by which time I think most of it was written.
So the Sanctus is one of the 3 tracks we've selected that for people to have a bit more of a preview of before the release.
Yeah.
I love that moment at the beginning where the brass kind of set us up and then the choir kind of fires in over the top.
Yes, I mean, I was worried about the brass a little bit, knowing that the choir, how many singers you got in your choir? 30 or maybe more than that?
It's kind of 25 adults and then there were, I think, 16 boys.
Yeah. But in Magdalen, of course, there were 12 men and 16 boys at full strength. So, yeah, I was a bit concerned about that in when we first did it.
Was it just the size of the choir that you had in mind when you chose your orchestration, or was it because you had particular instrumental effects that you were after?
Yes, I wanted softer sounds. I wanted quite sort of cool, soft sounds, which is why I didn't use an oboe.
Yeah,
you would think that that a Requiem would call out for an oboe, that sort of plangent quality.
Yeah.
So flute, oboe, flute, clarinet, bassoon, and then bassoon sort of makes the third horn, as it were, in terms of blend. No trombones, and a string sound. Yeah, I thought that those 3 softer woodwind would go well with the strings. So that was really, sort of softer qualities I was after, really. Of course, the flutes will. You mentioned the In Paradisum. The flute, I think, doubles the flute doubles the top line.
Yeah.
Very nice. The vocal line.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
And of course the clarinet, the altos, and the tenors, the bassoon. So sort of, I mean, there's nothing new in that particularly, but it does. That was another reason for my thinking those. Whereas an oboe would be too prominent, or perhaps in that sense.
No, I see what you mean.
But the doubling, yes, the doublings and doubling strings, of course.
Yeah.
And I think the very opening melody is doubled by, is it violas and a clarinet?
That's right.
So on the vocal, that vocal unison thing. So I was thinking about that as well. Mm.
Do you find it difficult setting words that are extremely familiar? I mean, obviously you've been a chorister and a lay clerk and a choral scholar and a conductor and a composer. All of these texts for the Requiem are so familiar. You know, the wonderful works by Duruflé and Fauré.
Yeah.
Is it difficult to filter out the great tunes that you've known all your life as you write this stuff?
It can be. Yeah. I once was asked to do a setting for a book of the Gibbons. This is the record of John. You know, the Gibbons text. This is the record of John. That was very, very difficult because it's such an ingrained piece in one's mind. I think as far as the Requiem is concerned, yeah, obviously, you know, and you can hear echoes of Fauré and Duruflé and Britten. But I think, actually going back to what we were talking about right at the start, because I was down to this deadline, I really hadn't got time to muck about thinking, oh, you know, that sounds like. I sort of knew what I wanted to write. I knew what I was aiming for in terms of atmosphere.
Yeah.
And that's what guided me. And of course, the other crucial thing is that it had to be, because it had to be learned quickly, can make it too difficult.
No.
It's terribly easy to write difficult music.
Yeah, I'm sure. But if you're thinking about how a singer, or particularly a young singer, is going to respond to this stuff,
Right. So it was all about, you know, that was the practicality of it was I wouldn't say uppermost in my mind, but it was in my mind. So and also trying to write lines, that's the other thing, because music is all about line, I think, anyway.
Yeah.
And you know, it's the movement of the lines of the singing, of the singers and of the choir. So it was those two things. I mean, I was thinking about quite a lot of things, but largely because I was down to the wire. It sounds a bit odd, but because I was down to the wire, I just had to kind of get on with it, buckle down and get on with it, and produce something for next morning's practice.
Yeah, there's no time for self-doubt, which is probably quite a good thing in a way.
Well, it is actually, yeah. Of course, when you keep, as you keep coming back to it, you soon know whether you think it's going, you know, you have to try to be very honest with yourself as to whether it's what you really meant. But if you're still working with the material over a period of a couple of months, I think it again, I was too busy with it, I suppose, for a real quality control, but anyway.
Well, it's all come out in the wash. Are there any particular moments in the piece that you're most happy with or particularly fond of? Or is that a very open-ended question?
I think the first movement is very successful structurally. Mm-hmm. But that pleases me. Creating a structure. I quite like the build-ups in the second movement. The Pie Jesu is that works quite nice. I was pleased with that because I like, if possible, to try and have a little germ of an idea, 3 or 4 notes that will then go for the whole, you know, you can play with for the whole movement without it staying its welcome. And I think, with the exception of the little unison bits on Sempiternam, the whole thing is based on that little rising triplet.
Yeah.
So
it gets under the listener's skin as well, I think.
Yeah, and then, you know, all the vocal line is made up of that, either going up or going down in all parts. So So I was pleased that I at least dreamed up something that I could do with the Pie Jesu. And I do like the Imparadisum. I think it is a bit weird how it, Paradise, you tend to think up.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I found it to just at the end descending in a rather inconsequential way. But I quite like that as well. I end quite a lot of the movements in a as it were a filmic way where you don't get a proper cadence.
Yeah, and there is quite often a rising
yes.
thing in the strings and the harp at the end of some of the movements, isn't there?
You get a chord that hangs and then it goes, which I thought in the context of a service would be effective, because it just goes into the building and then the service carries on, rather than like Brahms always trying to avoid the cadence so as it doesn't sound as if it's finished. That happens. There is a cadence at the end of the second movement, but can't remember what your question was now, but anyway.
Oh, it's okay, we're just chatting. It's interesting you single out the Pie Jesu as one of the kind of bits that you're most pleased with. So on this recording, as you know, the first section is just our boy choristers.
Yes.
Whereas the rest of the Requiem, with the exception of the Benedictus, which is just the adults, the rest of the Requiem, we have our sopranos and our choristers singing together, which is a mix that I really enjoy. We don't do it all that often, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Although of course the pandemic has made that impossible since the last recording session of the Requiem. That was the last time they sang together en masse, and I thought it'd be nice to find a moment in the piece for the boys to just sing something by themselves, and that was the obvious place. But I had a really nice time teaching it to them, and it's exactly what you mentioned, of that kind of rising triplet motif, which they kind of latched onto and got the idea with very quickly. But it also was very easy to teach them to sing it musically with a good sense of line, because it's kind of all there in the music already. You didn't need to kind of force a phrasing onto it to make it sound interesting. You'd written the musicality into the piece. So if that's what you were intending, it certainly worked, and it did a lot of good for the choristers. With any children's choir, everything is a progression all the time. You're always working towards something, training up the littler ones, and so it's never a static thing. And so it was really good for them to have a piece of music like that was very singable, that their kind of very young musical minds could sing musically almost instinctively. So it was a really nice thing for them to learn.
Well, as you're talking, I'm thinking about when I was a chorister, and we did things like the Britten Missa Brevis.
Yeah.
I think probably without exception, all every movement has a little sort of hook. So Kyrie eleison, di 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 di. So you've got that, and then rising.
Yeah.
And the da 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 da, Gloria de nations. And so you do pick it up. You do pick up these. You can see where the shape, as you say, the shape of the music. So rather than with something, something, dare I say, more contemporary, with more awkward intervals and so on, it's going to be more of a challenge.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's just how it turned out, Richard. Really.
Oh, well, let's hope enjoy it as much as we have. I suppose the other interesting thing to talk about is the fact that we did make this recording when the world was kind of on the cusp of being turned upside down by COVID. We rehearsed and performed the Requiem with the orchestra in a concert to an extremely small audience, because the government had just said maybe a good idea for everyone to stay at home, and we got our recording sessions in at the 11th hour. But I mean, had it have all been 24 hours later, I think we probably wouldn't have been able to do any of it. So it's
well, I remember you telling me.
Reminder of that time.
I remember you telling me that you had you had to be very persuasive to the college to for it to go ahead. So
yeah, they were very supportive of us doing it, but just neat. At that moment when government guidance was changing almost by the second, they just needed to know exactly what we were doing, and the concept of social distancing was introduced on day 2 of the recording. So suddenly all of the instruments were spread slightly further out, and it's a testament to Mike Happs, the recording engineer, that you can't tell. The sound he gets is the sound of the entire recording. But,
brilliant.